Welcome to the Ending Sexploitation podcast, where we decode sexual harm and provide you with active solutions. I'm your host, Kaylee McNamara. All right, well, welcome everyone for a special episode. Breaking news just happened today where the Supreme Court ruled on age verification, and so that age verification laws to keep kids off of pornography websites are constitutional. Woo! And I'm joined once again by Dani Pinter. Hey, Dani.
Yeah! Hey, I'm so excited!
This is such a good day.
Historic day,
Such a
big
good day.
win. Bad day for Pornhub.
Yep, they're mad. They're so mad. So
They're
it'll be
so
very
mad.
fascinating to see everything that comes from this. It's a really huge historic decision. I think some people might hear about this and think this is common sense. Of course, kids should be kept off of pornography websites. A lot of states, I mean, if not all states, have laws that it's illegal for adults to share pornography with children, to send it to kids. And so it makes sense that that kind of law exists online. But Dani, this was not a guarantee. Can you just walk
No.
us through maybe a bit of the background of how this came about?
Yeah, so this is a lot like what we talk about a lot of times, Section 230. This is one of those things where I think the general public knows the internet's crazy and insane and there's gross and weird stuff on there and they don't really know why. And it comes down to these legal things. So in 1996 and then again in 2004, Congress, so baby internet's brand new. But parents were already complaining that kids were being exposed to a lot of nasty stuff. And so Congress tried to pass laws to restrict minors' access to this material, to sexually explicit material, obscene material. And both of those efforts were struck down as unconstitutional. So essentially, since 2004, we have not had a state or federal regulation to prevent anything that would harm kids, right? Like nothing. So this is age verification, but there's really been nothing because those laws were struck down. The court applied strict scrutiny. So the court basically acknowledged that these efforts to protect kids online implicated free speech. And so since they applied strict scrutiny, that really put a damper on legislators' desire or willingness to try and pass laws that would protect kids online. Because if something is strict scrutiny, that is an almost impossible burden to overcome. So that's why in almost exactly 20 years, we have not seen a regulation to protect kids. So last year there was this wave starting with Texas of age verification laws, requiring that pornography websites implement reasonable age verification to keep kids off their site, right? Common sense, like you said. But this was actually ripe for constitutional challenge. Unsurprisingly, it was challenged by the Free Speech Coalition, which is a lobbying organization, represents the porn industry. A attorney that represents MindGeek even argued at oral argument before the Supreme Court, which I don't think helped anything because we then saw in this Supreme Court decision that the court even referenced the infamous New York Times article, Children of Pornhub, basically acknowledging that one of the porn websites challenging this law today has a serious problem with the egregious content on its website. So this isn't theoretical. The content is very, very, very bad and very, very harmful on these websites. So this, and I can get into the decision if you want, but I just kind of rambled for a bit there.
No, that's perfect. And yeah, I think that's important for people to know that it was this lobbying arm of the pornography industry that challenged it, the Texas law for age verification. And yeah, so let's just get into, so back in January was the oral arguments for this case, right? And I know that Nkosi was involved in some amicus briefs around this case as well. Are there any highlights? I know now suddenly January feels very long ago.
Yeah.
But do you have any memories from that?
Well, this is so amicus brief is, I don't even know if it's pronounced amicus or amicus.
I don't
People
know.
say it always, and I still am not sure. So I don't know. I say amicus brief, but it's
Okay.
It's a Latin phrase for friend of the court. So in Supreme Court cases, it's really common for NGOs or really any. It could be anybody who would have an interest in a certain Supreme Court case can write an amicus brief to the court to advocate for why they agree with one position or the other. This case had an unbelievable amount of amicus briefs. I think there was like over 20 amicus briefs filed on both sides, where all these different people, whether it be like tech companies, child protection agencies, just the gambit, were writing to the court, one way or the other, whether they support age verification or not. I think that there was more support for the bill, if I can recall, than not. But the National Center on Sexual Exploitation and COSI, we submitted a brief on behalf of 15 Texas state legislators writing. So we represented the Texas legislature to write in support of their bill, saying, why they think it's important from the perspective of the very serious harms to children. So our brief really focused on the research, the overwhelming research, to help educate the court, if there's any doubt that the content Texas is trying to protect kids from is very harmful. The research is conclusive; it's very harmful to children. And
Mhm.
so that's what was really interesting too about this opinion. It was a 6-3 decision. So, a pretty significant win, not very controversial, not really much of a split. And even the three dissenting justices, even their dissent was measured. They even acknowledged that kids should be protected from this material and that states should be able to protect them, and even hinted that maybe even this Texas law was constitutional. They basically just disagreed with the level of scrutiny that the majority opinion applied. And so I can get into what that means, dissecting the opinion, but that's really fascinating. Like, actually, the court was pretty much all in agreement that
Mm.
this bill was constitutional. That is okay and constitutional for Texas to require pornography websites to implement a reasonable age verification to protect kids, right? So this is like a slam dunk win for common sense because, like I said, for 20 years we've sort of been operating in the space of it's impossible to regulate the internet. Can't regulate the internet.
Right.
Can't protect kids from pornography
Can't
because that
protect
will impede
kids.
on free speech. I mean, that's what
Mhm.
everyone has been acting like we're fools, Haley. They say Nicosia are fools. You could, we all care about kids, but you don't get to restrict them because it's free speech. Well, guess what? Joke's on you. New day. I actually saw a really
A
funny
new
post.
day.
Yeah, and I agree with that. It's welcome to the new internet. I think Lila Mickleweight posted that. I'm like, this will mark
Mm,
a new season of the internet
a really
where
significant shift.
there is now a very clear path, and opening to do reasonable things to protect kids online. And you're not going to get away
Yeah,
with saying it's technologically impossible or free speech violation. So, yeah. So I'll stop
absolutely.
there again.
Before we get no, this is so helpful, and you're the lawyer, so I'm just really looking for your analysis of all this. Before we get into what the new internet might look like or what next steps would come from this decision, I would love for us to pause for a moment on the strict scrutiny versus intermediate scrutiny as a non-lawyer. What does that mean? Why is it important? It sounds kind of jargony.
Yeah, it is. So, the question of why can't we protect kids, that seems common sense. The reason why it's difficult is because it implicates free speech. So, the word pornography is not a legal term. That can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So, anything that falls under pornography is going to trigger like that will trigger the free speech, right? If you're trying to restrict pornography in any way, you are going to trigger free speech considerations. And so the court is going to have to look very carefully of is it a permissible regulation within the context of the First Amendment or not. So this Texas bill specifically set out to address websites where one third or more of its content contained content that was obscene as to minors. And they have a state law that already says, like you mentioned, Haley, prohibiting providing obscene content to minors. If a child walked in to a, sex toy shop they could not buy pornography like a magazine or a
Mhm.
video without providing their ID under state law. That's already the case, which interestingly enough, at oral argument, that was a big back and forth, and the court mentioned its opinion. The court asked both sides, but I think it's particularly interesting, asked the side of the porn industry, well, kids can't like buy it in a brick and mortar store, right? And like, right. And like, well, is that constitutional? Well, yeah, like almost certainly that's constitutional. So then why wouldn't it be a constitutional on the internet? Right. And the court was not satisfied that they had a good answer to that. And in the end, the court basically said, because it is constitutional then and always has been, this is a very normal and regular way to age gate kids when it's appropriate to age gate them, then of course you can do it on the internet. There was a nice little line in there where the court said, common principles of the First Amendment don't all of a sudden transform because the technology involved changes. And I think that is huge because, again, I think that marks a new age where, like, we have a Supreme Court that understands the internet, whereas our previous Supreme Court, and previous, I just mean like 20 years ago, which is like the last time they ever looked at the internet, did not. So we
Mhm.
have a Supreme Court now that is going to be much more savvy, and looking for common sense when we're dealing with internet and free speech principles here. So back to it. So the Texas law it's only requiring websites that have content that is obscene to minors to implement a reasonable age verification. And they were very broad. Like, this could be ID, it could be something else, it could be anything commercially reasonable. And I think that was very key to the court finding that this was acceptable. The law was not micromanaging anything in particular, and
Mhm.
everyone's concerns about privacy, well, really just find something. If one way is too invasive with privacy, find another way. The state was really very broad. You just do something that would reasonably restrict minors, and so
And
that's
could
what
I
the court.
just say, if I could
Yeah,
just add in there too, that for people who aren't aware, age verification has come a long way
yeah,
technologically. And there's an entire age verification association, provider association that works on making sure that the ways that they do this are verifying age, but not capturing and keeping your data, verifying age, not identity. There's many, many ways that it can be done and that it can be done while also respecting privacy and not collecting additional data. So I just do want to say that is that the amazing thing too about them keeping it broad is because this technology is already very good, but it's continuing to grow and to get better. And I think it is important to recognize that age verification is not the same as identity verification. It's just important to note.
really important point, Haley. And the law even says that the website can use a third party. It doesn't have to do it itself.
Mhm.
So, this is only, some websites have, right, obviously, like Meta has more technology available and resources available than, a small website. Well, the website just needs to hire a vendor, to your point,
Mhm.
Haley, who's already doing this, and this is becoming its own industry, that's competitive, which is good. Make it cost effective, make it, privacy and all of that, those considerations. And the Texas bill accounted for that. So I think that's another reason why the court, was not persuaded by the opposition's arguments, because where we are today, this is very doable. And we do it every day
Mhm.
in our internet lives and other contexts, right? So, but all that to say is, so the court went into, there, the Texas law is regulating obscene speech obscene as to minors. And so the court went through, what does that mean? Well, we have obscenity law. That's still good law. Historically, under the First Amendment principles, obscenity is not protected. And historically, states have the right to restrict children's access to material that would be obscene as to them, even if it wouldn't be obscene as to adults. And so that's the key here. Like, if this content on the website is, and the court was kind of clear, I mean, some of this may not be appropriate for anybody, but let's assume that some of this
Mhm.
content is, perfectly fine for adults to access. Adults have a First Amendment right to access the content on these pornographic websites, but but it would not be appropriate for children under the law. It would be obscene as to children
Mhm.
under Texas law. It is okay for Texas to restrict children as long as they allow adults access to that. And so then the question was, well, does age verification provide too much of a barrier to adults where it would really chill, and they actually, in practical terms, they really wouldn't have access to it anymore? And the court did not buy that, which again I think is such a win for common sense in the Supreme Court in the technology age. Of course, like you said, Haley, there's so many methods of age verification that are non-invasive and take privacy considerations into account, so that the court said it is only an incidental burden to adults. It is only an incidental
Mhm.
burden to adults. They can still access this speech because, importantly, and I guess I should back up, the court applied intermediate scrutiny. And that's important because there's three, when we're dealing with free speech, there's strict scrutiny, intermediate scrutiny, and rational basis scrutiny. Like I said, the last time the court reviewed this in 1998 and 2004, the court applied strict scrutiny, which is the highest burden to overcome. And as the court acknowledged in this opinion, it almost means that if any law has to overcome strict scrutiny, it almost guarantees the law will not. It's almost a
Mhm.
death knell for that law. Overcoming strict scrutiny is almost impossible to achieve, for free speech considerations. So if a law is burdening speech so much that it triggers strict scrutiny, well, then of course we don't want many laws. It shouldn't be easy for the law to overcome that, right? Because the free speech implicated is very serious. Intermediate is in the middle, right? And rational basis is below. So if the speech implicated, it's really not threatening speech at all. For example, the court points out, there might be laws where like technically speech is involved, but the law's not really targeting the content of the speech. They're targeting some other thing. Like a good example is like zoning regulations, things that have to do with, the way you want your city to be zoned. It does implicate speech in a sense, but that's not the reason for the zoning. That's going to be rational basis. And so the court is saying this is something in between. It is targeting the content, it is targeting obscene speech as to children, but because it is obscene speech and it's not, because it is obscene speech, it has less protection than other types of speech.
Mhm.
So that's a huge win because, we thought, even hoped that if the bill was found constitutional, we were worried the court would apply strict scrutiny. And that's essentially what the dissent argued, that you should have applied strict scrutiny and maybe this bill still would have passed it. But we know that had strict scrutiny applied, it wouldn't really, I mean, although it would have been a victory for age verification, it would provide very little to no guidance or opportunity to do anything else in this space to help kids. It would almost
Mhm.
regulate the ability to protect kids only to age verification, because strict
Oh,
scrutiny
okay.
means it's the least restrictive means. So the court would basically be finding that this is the only way you could protect kids, which would be a very, very narrow path moving forward. But instead, this intermediate scrutiny says, yeah, it is reasonable. It is not overburdening speech. And there's probably other things you could do that would be just as constitutional. So that's a huge victory. Not only is this Texas law constitutional, is age verification constitutional, but we have this nice guidance and path for protecting kids from obscene speech on the internet and other contexts as well.
I'm so excited to talk about that path because to me, this just really does signal that there's more that can be done in this space to protect kids from sexually explicit content and harms that are happening online. I mean, I think if I'm so excited for the Supreme Court decision and moving forward, what does this look like? What is that path? What are the doors that open? I mean, things that first come to me is number one, I think that this signals a cultural understanding about the harms of pornography to children in a really significant way. And it probably reflects where the culture is now, it's chicken or the egg, but I think it helps further this idea that it is common sense. The research is out there, it is settled. Pornography is harmful to children. Children deserve to be protected from being exposed to this content. And again, for some, that might sound like common sense, but this is not a settled issue. And there's been a really significant movement to normalize pornography for children, say that pornography is sex education for children. And that is the same thing, that if you restrict kids from seeing pornography, that it will in some ways harm their sexual expression or identity, which is completely incorrect. And all of the legitimate research shows pornography has mental health harms, increases likelihood of victimization, normalizes objectification, violence, really abusive themes, so many more harms to their neurological development, social skills, school performance, emotional connection with caregivers, the likelihood of forming long lasting, satisfying
Mm.
relationships. So many harms, but that has been a really significant debate. Is pornography good for kids? And I think that this helps set the cultural tone that no, it's not. And we can look at the research and recognize that. Obviously, too, I think this signals that more states should pass constitutional age verification laws to keep kids off of pornography platforms. And so many already have, and I'm sure that many more will. But what else, Danny? What else do you see as potential positive fallout from this decision?
Yeah. Yeah, well, you're absolutely right that I think this reflects a culture because on both sides or all sides of the political spectrum that the justices fall on, they universally acknowledged that this content is harmful
That's
for
significant.
children. Nobody was trying to make the case that there may be some instances in which children should be able to, no. There was universal consensus that this content is harmful to them and that states should be able to regulate that in some sense. So absolutely, I think that is super, super positive of where we are. And then to your point of, what are some of the other positives? I mean, the fact that this is intermediate, I mean, someone today in a different call was asking, oh, well, does this mean like we could age gate AI products or we could age gate social media? And I don't think it does mean that. It doesn't put a like rubber stamp on any age verification measure because this opinion is very much tethered to the regulation of content that is obscene as to minors, right? So because the content that was being targeted was obscene as to minors, the obscene part basically definitionally saying that this is such harmful content in and of itself that it gets less protection than other types of content. So it
Mm,
doesn't, I think, open the door to like any kind of age verification, but I think it does allow for more ways that we can protect kids from obscene content, which of course, like Anna Cozy, we're
mhm,
really concerned about. I think someone brought up, the AI grooming of kids, right? Like we see some of these chat bots engaging in like sexually explicit, almost grooming conversations with the kids. Well, if that gets to a place
mhm,
where it's actually obscene, I think you could regulate that and prevent kids from having access to those tools. So I think it's going to have this massive ripple effect of every product and online service is now going to have to take into account, am I delivering content that's obscene to kids? And if I am,
mhm,
maybe I don't want to be because I am going to get regulated in this space and that is doable. Or they're just going to proactively keep kids off in a really significant way because it is the law of the land now. It's constitutional to age gate kids from obscene content
mhm,
online. I mean, that is
mhm.
massive.
Really, really significant. And I think too, while it might not be an automatic, like you said, stamp on future legislation, I do think it signals that we should keep trying other
Yeah.
innovative state
Yeah.
solutions as well. Like I know that there's the device filter legislation that mandates that devices have their filters turned on instead of off when being sold to a minor. App Store Accountability Act
Yeah.
to make sure that kids aren't downloading harmful apps without parents' knowledge or consent is passing in some states. So I do think that it just
Oh,
shows
I think
greater understanding that kids do deserve some protections online. Mhm.
Yeah, and I think as to those 2 bills in particular, I think this is a huge boon for those. I can't imagine either of those being unconstitutional now. I mean, Nkosi drafted the device filter bill with the previous court decision in mind, so it's even more conservative, let's say, than age verification. And because it's
Mhm.
not strict scrutiny, which, like I said, strict scrutiny, the way the test is it says, oh, whatever measure you did is okay as if it's the least restrictive means. Least restrictive, meaning there's no other way you could have done it. It's the only way you could have done it. So it almost would have pigeonholed us into age verification. Well, so I think that now that it's intermediate, clearly having device filters turned on, which is even less burdensome than age verification, we're not stuck in that having to be the only thing. And it's actually less than that. So I think like that's
Yeah,
guaranteed. I don't think there's any reason why that wouldn't be constitutional. And
that's
similar with
so
the App
exciting.
Store Accountability Act, it's like this is again age gating in a really reasonable way. I think this provides a lot of momentum for those, a lot of support support, constitutional support for those, and cuts away some of the biggest arguments that the opposition was making that no, they're just literally no longer valid.
So significant. And I think it is important to note that those kinds of bills and even other innovative solutions that haven't been passed around yet are really important because age
Yeah.
verification obviously so vital, but this isn't a silver bullet issue. We definitely need a mosaic. We need, I know there's
Yeah.
often the analogy of car safety. You need seatbelts, you need airbags, you need regulations for how the car is made. There's a lot that you do need to actually protect all the different spheres and ways that kids are encountering harm online. But obviously,
Yeah.
this is just such a significant step forward. I think, too, it will really open up the door for more lawsuits potentially, like the one that I know that you're involved with, Dani, on behalf of minors when pornography websites don't comply and when they still allow children to be exposed. Would you imagine
Exactly, and,
so?
yeah, exactly, I think the reason we have that lawsuit is because the websites ignored Kansas's law, and I think partly that's because they felt confident it wouldn't survive. They thought the Supreme Court was gonna strike it down. I think that we're gonna see a huge vibe shift. I think the whole industry is gonna take this much more seriously, and either they will comply or we'll see more lawsuits, which is amazing. AGs are gonna be emboldened to enforce the laws when they have them. They have AV laws in their states, they're gonna be emboldened to enforce them with the confidence that the Supreme Court has said it's constitutional. So the one other thing I wanted to mention is this is exactly why we cannot have the state moratorium on AI because the
Mm,
states acted, right? It would have been impossible to get a federal age verification law. And so the states were like, well, we're going to do it. And we saw 21
yeah.
states very quickly make things happen. And, our founders are like, it's a kind of a common phrase in talking about our sort of nation's history and saying the states are the laboratories that the states are the ones that are able to test out laws and they're more nimble and can move more quickly. And if they're not constitutional, the Supreme Court will sort that out so much faster than you could even get something across the finish line in Congress. And then that's kind of by intention. But so for the, states to be hampered and restricted from doing this with AI, for doing what they can and experimenting with protecting their citizens at the state level. I think this Texas age verification victory shows even more powerfully why that is not a good idea and we should all oppose it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dani. I know that you have to run. It's a big day, a lot of interviews going on, but I'm so glad we were able to snag you, talk about this. Such an exciting victory. Everyone who's listening, please share it far and wide and be reminded this is a good reason to contact your state legislators when you see good legislation come through because it can make such a huge difference for the whole nation. So thank you so much, Dani.
Absolutely. Exciting day. Yes. Thank you,
Great
Haley.
day.